Alright mates, how's it going? In today's video, chapter 19 of Arthas Rise of the Lich King. More sadness for the High Elves, unfortunately. So let's go! Sylvanas knew blowing up the bridge wasn't going to stop Arthas and his army. Just delay him a little bit. But hopefully, that delay would be long enough for word to reach the Magi at the Sunwell Plateau. However, there was something else bothering the Ranger General. Arthas seemed so bloody confident, as if he already knew for certain that he would be able to breach the enchantments at the second Elf Gate. Whoever had betrayed them, had they told him about the key? Yes, the traitor, Darkhan Drathir, had indeed told Arthas about the key of the Three Moons, a magical item that had been split into 3 magical crystals and hidden throughout Quel'thalas, in heavily guarded temples. Each temple was built atop intersections of ley lines, which in turn caused the crystals to create a magical barrier known as Bandinorial, or the Gatekeeper. So basically, all Arthas had to do was go to each of the sites, Antalas, Andaroth and Anowin, kill the guards, and take the crystals. Simples. But the ridiculously pretty elves guarding the temples had presented a little bit more of a challenge than Arthas had expected, and he couldn't help but wonder how such a fragile, effeminate race could stand up to his army. That pesky Ranger General that had blown up the bridge, for example. She'd cost him precious time. The bitch. It had taken bloody ages to get his siege engines across the water. Mainly because it took a while for him to figure out that he could just create his own bridge using the mindless zombies that followed him. So he ordered dozens of them to wade into the river, lie down, and then they just rolled the siege engines over the top of them, and fouled the water at the same time. 'Twas genius. It's probably worth mentioning that there was some kind of tingling sensation at the back of Arthas's mind. Something nagging at him. Feelings. Most of the time it would just pass completely unnoticed, but once in a while, memories would flash in Arthas's mind, and with those memories, guilt and shame. But Arthas wasn't going to listen to feelings. Feelings are for wimps. Meanwhile, the Rangers had fled to Fairbreeze village, and after the initial shock passed, the citizens there tended to the wounded and offered to help in any way they could. Sylvanas ordered those that could not fight to head to Silvermoon as quickly as possible. Take nothing, just go. But what about my nice shoes? Just shut up and go. The dead march upon us. They don't get tired. They don't wait for people to grab their nice shoes. Anyone that falls just gets added to their ranks. The woman who Sylvanas had just reprimanded seemed deeply offended, but the Ranger General didn't give a shit. She was too busy looking around and strategizing. Arthas and his army were going to be here soon. There was no doubt about that. However, Sylvanas spotted a spire nearby, a good place to mount a defence. So, she took a deep breath, looked back towards her rangers and the citizens that had volunteered to fight, and barked her orders, despite knowing full well that for most of them this would be their final battle. And after organising themselves at the spire, it was finally time. The undead have been sighted. Be ready. The first line of defence, made up of archers, hand-to-hand fighters and dragonhawk riders, head out, and fell almost immediately to the hideous vanguard approaching. And as inevitable death got closer, Sylvanas couldn't help but think how strange the mind was. That even in this moment, she had an ancient song playing in her head. One that she and her siblings, Illyria, Verisa and Lirath, had loved to sing. And that song went a little bit like this. Ena Ela, Bedere, Keldere, Shindu Falana. It's a little bit more melodic than that usually. And without even realising it, her hand had crept up and closed around the necklace she was wearing. A gift from her oldest sister, Illyria, passed down to her when Illyria had ventured beyond the dark portal, and then never came back. Attack! For Quel'thalas! Sylvanas then fought as ferociously as a savage lynx from Eversong Woods, channeling her pain and outrage into violence. She knew she was going to die, but she was going to take as many of these undead twats with her as she could. She was going to keep fighting until they'd utterly destroyed her. But then there was a sudden lull in the fighting. The wall of undead fighters separated, revealing Arthas, sat atop his horse, still staring intently at Sylvanas. I salute your bravery, elf, but the chase is over. Then I make my stand here, Butcher. As you will, Ranger General. Arthas didn't even bother to dismount. Instead, he kicked Invincible, who then galloped directly towards Sylvanas, and drew back his massive sword. Sylvanas sobbed only once. Not a cry of fear or regret, but of anger and hatred that she had not been able to stop him. Illyria, sister, I come. Frostmourne then pierced her body, and it was cold. Very cold. Arthas then withdrew the sword from her, and stared as she shivered on the ground. Finish it. I deserve a clean death. After all you've put me through, woman, the last thing I'll give you is the peace of death. For a split second, Sylvanas felt nothing but fear. He was going to raise her as one of these grotesque monsters. You wouldn't dare. And then she died. It was soft and warm and comforting. At last, she could rest. But A sudden agony then shot through her. This was no normal physical pain. This was pain of the spirit. Her soul was being torn from her lifeless body. It was bloody awful. And as a colourless grey world reformed around her, she could see her tormentor. Banshee, thus I have made you. You can give voice to your pain, Sylvanas. I'll give you that much. And in doing so, you shall cause pain to others. So now you, troublesome ranger, shall serve. Sylvanas, absolutely terrified, glanced down at her own broken and bloodied corpse, gazed into her own dead eyes, and then looked back at Arthas. I will never serve you, butcher. However, Arthas twitched his finger ever so slightly, and once again, Sylvanas felt excruciating pain shoot through her. She was utterly powerless before him, a tool, and there was nothing she could do about it. Your rangers serve as well. They are in my army now. It did not have to be this way. Your fate, theirs, and the rest of your people's rests upon your choices. It's your fault, Banshee. And so, the battle was over, and they'd lost it, obviously. Arthas was now marching onwards to the Sunwell itself. Sylvanas' body had been gathered up and flung onto one of the many meat wagons, and she was floating alongside her new boss man, like a shiny new toy, and she was beginning to hear the whispers. At first, she wondered if she'd gone insane. She'd been through a lot. It was entirely possible. But it soon became apparent that this voice was not just in her head.
For my glory you will serve. For the dead you will toil. For obedience you will hunger. Arthas is the first and most beloved of my death knights. He will command you forever, and you'll bloody love him.
He may control my actions, but he will never break my will. Soon, the dead army had reached Silvermoon itself. Citizens of Silvermoon, I have given you ample opportunities to surrender, but you have stubbornly refused. Know that today, your entire race and your heritage will end. Death itself has come to claim you. Arthas even paraded the body of Rangers General Sylvanas Windrunner about, right in front of the Silvermoon citizens, but they still didn't surrender. And so, Arthas and his scourge reduced the beautiful city of magic and high elves and stuff to rubble, basically. Those that fell within the city were raised to serve, and then on they all went, leaving the blackened dead scar in their wake. Sylvanas had at least hoped that the channel between Silvermoon and Quel'thalas would prove an impassable barrier for Arthas. Despite the size of his army, he still didn't have enough peeps to create another corpse bridge. But the twat still figured out a way. He simply cast Frostmourne into the water and created a huge bridge of ice, and then crossed that. And once on Quel'thalas, Arthas faced the beloved king of the High Elves himself, Anasterian's Sunstrider. Sylvanas desperately hoped her king would be victorious, but she knew deep down he wouldn't be. He was thousands of years old, and with her new spectral sight, she could see a frailty about him that she'd never noticed before. But he still managed to piss Arthas off a little bit. Wielding the ancient weapon that had been passed down through his family, Felamalorn, or Flamestrike, he waited for Arthas to rush towards him atop Invincible, stepped out of the way at the last minute, and then sliced Invincible's front legs off. And as Arthas picked himself up off the ground and turned towards the Elven King, his face was full of rage. He rushed the old bugger, shattered Flamestrike, and then used Frostmourne to rip Anasterian's soul right out of his body. And don't worry, Arthas then just went over to Invincible and used dark magics to regenerate the horse's legs, so it's fine. Not so fine if you're more worried about the High Elves, though. They were pretty much done. About 90% of all High Elves were genocided during this attack. There's never been an official population number given out, but 90% is 90% in it, however you look at it. And Sylvanas had been forced to watch the whole thing, even participate in some of it. So as you can imagine, she probably made that ree noise quite a few times. It's probably why she rees so much in the first place. And finally, Arthas reached the Sunwell, and poured Quel'thasar's remains into the swirling golden vortex of power. And even after everything else Sylvanas had witnessed that day, she was still kind of stunned by what emerged. Not only did the Sunwell itself change and darken, but some weird looking horned skeleton covered in chains popped out and was all like, "Sup, bruv? I am reborn!" Was that it? Her home, her race, everything destroyed. Just to raise this one bloke. Sylvanas was understandably furious. The only thing that made her feel a little bit better was that the traitor, Darkhan Drathea, then randomly attempted to betray Arthas and was immediately killed for it. And we're leaving it there! This story doesn't get any lighter, for those that don't know. It's one of the reasons why I chose to start it with an almost Disney-like tone, because this ain't no Disney story. As usual, link in the description if you're interested in buying this book. Also, there's links to my Discord server and my Patreon page too. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all of that bollocks. And all that's left to say is, thanks for watching, and see ya!